A portrait taken in 1906 shows a mother and her young son, yet the woman's expression has left experts unsettled for over a century. In the spring of 2023, Dr. Elizabeth Barnes, a professor in the American Studies Department at Columbia University, received a mysterious package at her office. The sender, an elderly woman from Rochester, New York, explained that she had inherited a box of family photographs and wished to know if any held historical significance before she donated them to a local museum. Inside the collection of faded family portraits, one image in particular drew Dr. Barnes's immediate attention. Dated April 12, 1906. The photograph depicted a well-dressed woman in her 30s, seated beside a boy of about 8 years old. An embossed studio stamp revealed it had been taken at Morrison's photography studio in Rochester, a business renowned at the time for catering to the city's wealthiest families. At first glance, the portrait seemed entirely conventional. The woman wore a high-necked dark gown with intricate beadwork, her hair carefully arranged in the fashionable Gibson girl style of the Progressive era. The boy, assumed to be her son, stood dutifully by her side, dressed in a crisp sailor suit with knee-length stockings, his hand resting lightly yet formally on her shoulder. The studio setting was textbook for the period, featuring an ornate chair, a painted backdrop, and meticulously arranged lighting designed to project dignity, prosperity, and social status. All signs pointed to this being nothing more than a commemorative image of an affluent mother and her healthy, well-kept child. However, the longer Dr. Barnes studied the photograph, the more a sense of unease grew. Having spent 15 years analyzing historical photography, she was intimately familiar with the usual range of expressions captured in studio portraits of that era. Subjects typically wore composed expressions, faint smiles, or solemn dignity. Practical choices in a time when long exposures demanded motionless faces. Yet the woman in this photograph did not conform. Her gaze burned unnervingly through the sepia tones, her eyes radiating a mixture of steely determination, desperate pleading, and what could only be described as restrained terror. The most disturbing detail was not her eyes alone, but the dissonance between her rigidly proper posture and the storm of emotion etched across her face, a silent story breaking through the carefully staged setting. The boy beside her appeared entirely ordinary, even cheerful, his expression betraying no awareness of the silent turmoil consuming his mother. Dr. Barnes's first examination of the photograph revealed technical qualities that only deepened the puzzle of the woman's unsettling expression. The clarity was striking for 1906, suggesting Morrison's photography studio employed state-of-the-art equipment and techniques during the early years of commercial portraiture. Yet, under close scrutiny, disturbing details emerged. The woman's folded hands betrayed her restraint, the knuckles so tense they seemed to glow pale through the sepia tones, while the fine wrinkles in the fabric of her dress revealed the pressure of a clenched grip held too long. More troubling still was the very fact of the photograph's timing. Portraits of this period often required exposure times lasting several seconds, demanding subjects remain utterly still. And yet the woman's eyes conveyed acute distress and intensity that should have made such steadiness impossible. Seeking clarity, Dr. Barnes consulted with colleagues who specialized in the technical and psychological analysis of historic imagery. Professor Michael Chen of the Rochester Institute of Technology examined the print with an expert's eye, confirming that the photograph was executed with remarkable precision. The lighting is textbook, the focus is crisp, and the composition matches the best practices of professional studios. In 1906, he explained, but the faint blur surrounding her eyes tells a different story. That is consistent with someone holding back tears or struggling against involuntary movement. To deepen her understanding, Dr. Barnes also reached out to Dr. Sarah Whitfield, a psychologist renowned for evaluating historical documents for signs of hidden trauma or mental strain. Her assessment was no less troubling. "This woman's face shows clear markers of extreme stress," Dr. Whitfield noted. "Her wide eyes suggest hypervigilance, a constant readiness for danger, while the tightness around her mouth reveals someone forcing control over an expression that wants to betray her. What strikes me as extraordinary is her ability to maintain the posture and dignity required for a formal portrait while clearly enduring overwhelming distress. This indicates either a profound level of self-control or the pressure of some external force so compelling that she felt obligated to complete the sitting, no matter the emotional cost." The sharp contrast between the woman's visible anguish and the boy's cheerful composure deepened the mystery. Children of that era were often attuned to their parents' moods. Yet this boy seemed entirely unaffected, as though he were shielded from or oblivious to his mother's inner torment. Driven to uncover the truth behind the unsettling portrait, Dr. Barnes began her search for the pair's identities. The back of the photograph offered no names, only the studio's stamp and the date. But the fineness of their clothing and the costly studio setting strongly suggested that they were members of Rochester's upper class. Morrison's photography studio, known from 1895 to 1920 as one of the city's premier establishments, regularly catered to the wealthiest families, business magnates, and prominent citizens. Hoping to find a lead, Dr. Barnes contacted the Rochester Historical Society, whose archives held fragments of Morrison's business records, though much had been lost to time. What remained, however, offered intriguing clues. Appointment books revealed that Morrison's charged premium fees and required advance reservations, particularly for formal family portraits. Strikingly, the ledger for April 12, 1906, listed only a single session, Mrs. H. Caldwell and Son, 2:00 p.m., special circumstances. Payment in advance. The note about special circumstances stood out as most entries contained only the bare details of names, times, and standard prices. Turning to Rochester's social registers, Barnes found that the Caldwell family was indeed among the city's elite. Henry Caldwell was a wealthy manufacturer of agricultural equipment, and his wife Helena was active in charitable circles, frequently appearing in the society pages. Yet Barnes noticed a conspicuous gap in Helena's public presence during the early months of 1906. She was frequently mentioned in 1905 and again later that same year. But for several months leading up to and immediately following the portrait session, her name vanished from the papers. Census records provided more unsettling confirmation. In 1900, Helena and Henry's young son William appeared with them. But by 1910, he was listed as living not with his parents, but with his grandparents, with no explanation given for the unusual arrangement. The evidence pointed to a crisis in the Caldwell family during that critical year, one severe enough to disrupt normal life and perhaps account for Helena's expression of desperation in the portrait. Yet when Barnes sought out official records from 1906, she met with an unexpected obstacle. Rochester's archives were well preserved for most early 20th century families, but documents concerning the Caldwells contained troubling gaps. Property deeds, business files, and personal records from the key months were either missing entirely or obscured with heavy redactions. Most disturbing of all court records from 1906 contained several sealed files marked with the Caldwell name. The files remained restricted more than a century later. To understand the rarity of this, Barnes consulted Professor James Mitchell of the University of Rochester Law School, who explained that permanent sealing of court records was highly unusual, reserved only for cases involving grave criminal charges or matters of national security. The fact that these records remained sealed after 117 years strongly implied that something extraordinary was at stake. Professor Mitchell emphasized that ordinary privacy protections for family disputes or sensitive personal matters would have expired long ago. For files to remain inaccessible after more than a century, either there were ongoing legal ramifications or influential figures had deliberately intervened to keep the information hidden. Further investigation into hospital archives revealed additional anomalies. Records from Rochester's major medical facilities contained regular entries under Helena Caldwell's name before and after 1906. Yet for the first quarter of that year, there was a conspicuous void. For a wealthy woman accustomed to frequent medical attention, such an absence was highly unusual. The trail widened when Barnes uncovered evidence that several of Rochester's most prominent families had abruptly departed the city during the same period. Society pages described extended European tours, sudden educational voyages, and leisurely retreats abroad, all clustered around early 1906. The timing of these departures corresponded directly with Helena Caldwell's portrait session and subsequent disappearance from public life. Bank records, though fragmentary, revealed further irregularities. Substantial sums were withdrawn from Caldwell accounts during the same interval alongside large transfers that suggested either high-stakes investments or preparations for significant expenses such as overseas travel or costly legal proceedings. The combined picture of missing records, sealed files, unexplained absences, and financial upheaval painted a portrait of crisis among Rochester's elite. Helena Caldwell's haunted expression in the photograph seemed inextricably linked to the event that had unsettled the city's upper circles. An incident so significant that it drove wealthy families to leave altered financial patterns and prompted the concealment of official documents. Dr. Barnes began to realize she was no longer tracing a single family's misfortune, but uncovering the edges of a scandal that Rochester's most powerful citizens had carefully buried. Turning to newspapers from the period, she systematically reviewed the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle archives for the first quarter of 1906. The results were striking. While the paper ordinarily balanced local coverage with national news, those months were curiously dominated by international stories. The San Francisco earthquake in April and political developments in Washington were given exhaustive coverage, while Rochester's social scene, normally a staple of the paper, was nearly absent. The omissions appeared deliberate rather than accidental. Society pages that usually overflowed with notes on charity galas, business dinners, and fashionable gatherings were unusually sparse. Several columnists who regularly chronicled the city's elite families were conspicuously absent, their bylines missing for weeks at a time. The clearest evidence lay in the scattered, easily overlooked notices tucked away in the back pages. Brief lines about prominent citizens leaving on extended travel families, relocating for vague health reasons, and social functions postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. Each item might have seemed trivial on its own, but taken together, they suggested a concerted effort to divert attention from something the city's most powerful residents preferred to keep hidden. Individually, the newspaper items seemed mundane, but taken together, they hinted at a coordinated exodus of Rochester's upper class. The most telling discovery surfaced in an editorial published on April 15, 1906, only 3 days after Helena Caldwell's unsettling portrait session. Titled, "Maintaining Community Standards," the editorial stressed the importance of safeguarding family privacy and respecting the discretion of the city's most valued citizens during times of difficulty. While no names were mentioned, the timing and tone suggested it was a direct response to recent events among Rochester's elite. The article warned that responsible journalism must weigh the broader impact of exposing sensitive family matters and praised those who sought privacy in moments of crisis. The link grew stronger when Dr. Barnes learned that the paper's editor, Robert Morrison, was the brother of the very photographer who had taken Helena Caldwell's portrait. This family connection hinted at an orchestrated effort between the press and the studio to control the narrative. Further evidence emerged in Robert Morrison's personal papers housed at the Rochester Historical Society, which contained correspondence with prominent businessmen during early 1906. In letters, he spoke of maintaining discretion and protecting community interests amid what he referred to as the recent unpleasantness. The picture became clear Rochester's most powerful figures had worked together to bury details of an event that filled the city's wealthiest circles with fear and drove families into secrecy or temporary exile. Dr. Barnes's investigation advanced dramatically when she obtained access to the private medical journals of Dr. Edmund Thornfield, physician to many of Rochester's elite families. Preserved by his descendants and only recently donated to the University of Rochester Medical Center archives, these notes provided an unfiltered account of the medical crises gripping the city's upper class in early 1906. Rather than routine ailments, Dr. Thornfield documented case after case of nervous exhaustion, acute anxiety, and hysteria, triggered by what he described as extraordinary circumstances. Most disturbing of all was his entry dated April 10, 1906, 2 days before the portrait was taken. It read, "Mrs. H. Caldwell presented with severe nervous distress. Reports persistent nightmares, sleeplessness, and overwhelming dread. Physical examination reveals no medical cause. Symptoms appear trauma-related. Prescribed laudanum for rest. Strongly advised immediate removal from current environment." The notes revealed she was not alone. During those same months, Mrs. Edward Harrison, Mrs. Charles Bennett, and Mrs. Matthews, William Peaton sought treatment for nearly identical conditions. Thornfield's records became more explicit as the crisis deepened, and his entry for April 12, 1906, the exact day of Helena's portrait, was chilling. Mrs. Caldwell insisted on attending her photography appointment, despite my strong warning against public exposure. Patient states she must maintain normal appearances and shield her son from the truth. I have grave concerns regarding her judgment and stability. His final entries showed her condition collapsing after the portrait session. Patient returned in state of complete emotional breakdown. Symptoms severe. Crisis ongoing. Reports indicated that Helena feared she could not control her expression during the photography session and worried the image would betray her inner turmoil. Dr. Thornfield advised immediate travel to distant relatives and insisted that she remove herself from Rochester entirely. His records also revealed treatment of young William Caldwell, which helped explain why the boy appeared so composed in the portrait. Despite his mother's breakdown, William was seen for recurring stomach complaints. Yet the notes emphasized that he seemed unaware of the family crisis because Helena had gone to great lengths to protect him. Thornfield recommended maintaining the boy's daily routine to preserve his sense of normalcy. Collectively, these medical records revealed a community of women traumatized by some shared experience or sight with Helena Caldwell, among the most severely affected. Her insistence on proceeding with the portrait, despite medical warnings, accounted for the chilling contrast between her perfect posture and the fear burning in her eyes. Dr. Barnes's investigation shifted dramatically when she linked the medical records to a forgotten industrial disaster in Rochester during early 1906. While reviewing Thornfield's patient list, she noticed that many of the women stricken with nervous conditions were married to men involved in the city's industrial sector. Digging into safety archives, she uncovered evidence that Caldwell Agricultural Equipment, Henry Caldwell's company, had suffered a major workplace accident on March 15, 1906. The official report filed with the New York State Department of Labor described the event in sterile language, noting a mechanical malfunction and resulting injuries at the plant. Yet this sanitized version concealed the magnitude of what had occurred. Labor union archives and workers' compensation records provided far darker accounts. Survivor testimonies revealed that the catastrophe involved the total collapse of the factory's main stamping press, an enormous machine designed to forge agricultural equipment parts. The malfunction had struck during a shift change, the single busiest moment of the day, ensuring that the maximum number of workers were present on the floor. The union files contained harrowing eyewitness accounts describing the scene in visceral detailed testimony, so graphic that it stripped away any illusion of the incident being a routine industrial mishap. One surviving worker recalled that the press came crashing down. While men were still laboring beneath it, the sound followed by screams that seemed to echo endlessly. He described blood pooling across the floor, some men crushed outright, while others lay trapped begging for help that no one could give. According to labor union records, the true death toll was far higher than officials admitted. Where state filings listed only 3 fatalities, union testimony claimed as many as 12 men had perished, with dozens more maimed. The discrepancy bore every sign of deliberate underreporting, meant to deflect legal liability and shield the company from scandal. The revelation that most shocked Dr. Barnes was that several of Rochester's wealthiest families had been present inside the factory that day. Internal company documents confirmed that Henry Caldwell had arranged a tour for prospective investors and their families to coincide with a demonstration of the firm's newest equipment. Among the invited guests was Helena Caldwell, along with other society wives. These women had stood in the gallery as the stamping press failed, forced to witness men being mangled and killed before their eyes. The trauma left indelible scars that no degree of social privilege could erase. The portrait taken on April 12, 1906, came just 4 weeks after Helena had endured that nightmare. Her desperate expression captured forever as she attempted to present normality for her son. The accident at Caldwell Agricultural Equipment unleashed a cover-up of staggering proportions orchestrated by the city's most influential citizens. As Barnes dug deeper, she found corporate files preserved in the University of Rochester's business archives that revealed Henry Caldwell had immediately engaged the city's most expensive law firm to manage the fallout. Their strategy, laid out in preserved attorney letters, revolved around suppressing casualty numbers and ensuring no witness testimony reached the public. Financial ledgers told an even darker story. Large payments were issued to the families of dead and injured workers under the guise of compensation. But the accompanying legal contracts demanded ironclad silence. Each recipient was forced to sign agreements forbidding them from ever speaking of what they had seen, effectively erasing the truth of the disaster from public record while protecting the reputations of the elite who had been present. The hush money extended well beyond the families of the dead and injured workers. Dr. Barnes uncovered records showing that city officials, newspaper editors, and even hospital staff had received quiet payments. The Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, whose coverage of local affairs had grown curiously thin after March 1906, was suddenly the recipient of generous advertising contracts from Caldwell Agricultural Equipment. At the same time, medical files, once restricted but released under historical research requests, revealed the true scale of the disaster's aftermath. Rochester General Hospital had taken in far more casualties on March 15th than the official reports acknowledged, its emergency ward overflowing with mangled men. Many lingered for days before succumbing to their wounds. Deaths never counted in the state's sanitized filings. Most striking of all were the records documenting the arrival of Rochester's society women. Helena Caldwell, along with Mrs. Harrison, Mrs. Bennett, and Mrs. Peaton, had been brought in directly from the factory floor. Their condition recorded not as physical injury, but as profound nervous shock. The notes written by Dr. Thornfield that day were chilling in their clarity. Mrs. Caldwell and other ladies present during factory incident display acute symptoms of traumatic collapse. patients report witnessing multiple fatalities at close range. Mrs. Caldwell in particular states she cannot expunge the vision of trapped men from her memory and expresses feelings of personal responsibility due to her family's ownership of the facility. It became clear that the cover-up was not piecemeal, but systematic, a conspiracy of intimidation and bribery coordinated across every level of Rochester's establishment. Helena's haunted eyes in the portrait reflected not just private grief, but the crushing awareness that her family was complicit in silencing the truth. The concealment also explained the sudden disappearance of Rochester's elite from the society pages in the spring of 1906. The exodus of prominent families was more than a retreat born of guilt. It was a flight from exposure. Barnes traced travel records and passport applications, showing a wave of hurried departures to Europe in the weeks after the catastrophe. The wealthy had not simply sought rest abroad, they were safeguarding reputations and evading the risk that their presence at the scene of the calamity might one day surface, unraveling their carefully constructed social standing and implicating them in a crime of concealment. The Caldwells, Harrisons, Bennets, and Petons all arranged lengthy stays abroad in England, France, and Switzerland, publicly justified as trips for health and education, but in truth designed to place them safely beyond the reach of legal scrutiny. For Helena Caldwell, the fateful portrait session of April 12, 1906, had been scheduled as one of her last appointments before the family boarded a ship for London. Letters preserved in family archives revealed that Henry Caldwell had demanded the family fulfill all existing social commitments until their departure, convinced that any abrupt deviation from routine would raise suspicion. Helena's own correspondence painted a heartbreaking picture of her resistance. In a letter to her sister dated April 11th, she wrote, "I am not fit to be photographed. My distress will surely show upon my face, and it will be preserved for all time." Yet Henry dismissed her protest, declaring that the portrait was necessary to preserve appearances and protect the family's reputation during their extended absence. The same letter bared the depth of Helena's suffering. "I cannot sleep without seeing their faces, Margaret. The sound of the machine breaking, the screaming, the blood, they haunt me unceasingly. Henry insists we must appear normal, but I know my face will betray me. How can I sit for a portrait when those widows do not even know the truth of how their husbands died?" The family's European sojourn lasted nearly 2 years, and by the time they returned to Rochester in late 1907, the furor surrounding the industrial disaster had largely subsided. Public memory had reshaped the event into a minor mishap with only a handful of casualties, the official narrative standing unchallenged. But the shadow of that day never lifted from Helena Caldwell. Dr. Thornfield's medical records showed that she continued treatment for anxiety and depression long after her return, her health and spirit permanently broken. Her once active presence in Rochester society dwindled until she became nearly invisible, retreating into reclusion as the years passed. Most tragic of all was the cruel irony of the photograph itself. Intended as a final gesture of composure before the family's flight, it instead became the moment in which Helena's carefully constructed facade faltered. Freezing forever, the anguish of a woman forced to bear witness to horror, while also carrying the unbearable weight of her family's complicity in silencing the truth. Her expression revealed not only personal trauma, but also the moral torment of a woman forced into complicity with a cover-up that denied justice to the families of the dead. Through her haunted gaze, Dr. Barnes uncovered a story that reached far beyond a single photograph. Helena Caldwell's terrifying expression in 1906 was not merely a moment of anguish preserved on paper. It was evidence of how industrial tragedies were buried under influence, money and silence in early 20th century America, often with the direct involvement of those who had witnessed the horrors firsthand. What the powerful had tried to erase the photograph had captured forever. In that portrait, Helena's inability to mask her torment became an unintentional act of defiance, a historical record that contradicted decades of official denials and sanitized corporate reports. When Dr. Barnes published her findings in the Journal of Industrial History, under the title Bearing Witness, Photographic Evidence of Trauma in Industrial Cover-Ups, 1906, the impact was immediate. Her research reignited debate about workplace safety violations during the era and revealed the systematic ways in which fatalities had been hidden to protect industry and reputation. The Rochester Historical Society responded by establishing a memorial exhibit honoring the workers who died in the Caldwell disaster, publicly naming them for the first time in more than a century. Their descendants, who had lived for generations without the truth, finally learned how their ancestors had perished. Labor historians drew upon Barnes's work to revisit other manufacturing accidents from the period, uncovering similar patterns of suppression across New York State's industrial towns. The scale of underreported deaths proved to be far greater than anyone had suspected. Mental health historians also recognized the photograph as one of the earliest preserved visual documents of what modern medicine would identify as post-traumatic stress disorder. Helena's face, frozen in sepia tones, revealed the psychological violence of witnessing industrial carnage long before such conditions were acknowledged or understood. Even the Morrison Studios' cryptic notation of special circumstances gained chilling clarity, evidence that the photographer himself sensed he was capturing someone in a state of profound psychological collapse. What Henry Caldwell had intended as a calculated act of respectability, a portrait to project normalcy before his family's flight abroad, became instead the damning artifact that preserved the truth. Helena Caldwell's expression, uncontainable, despite her efforts, endured for more than a century, until it could finally speak not only for her own suffering, but for the silenced workers whose lives had been stolen and then hidden. In the end, her haunted eyes bore witness across time, restoring dignity to the forgotten dead and exposing the lengths to which power will go to bury its sins.